tough old world, but you know, that you play the hand that you're dealt. We're all born into different circumstances, different parents, different values. You play the hand that you're dealt. Get over it.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Benedetto, and I'm the founder of Glasgow-based design and branding agency, The Loft, and this is LOFTcast. LOFTcast is a video and audio podcast celebrating high-impact people who are leading change today. This morning, we're absolutely thrilled to be here with Colin Robertson CBE. Lanark-born, brought up in Shotts, Colin is one of Scotland's top business leaders. In a remarkable stint spanning 13 years as CEO bus and coach manufacturer Alexander Dennis, Colin has increased annual turnover almost 400% to 631 million profitably. He's helped transform Alexander Dennis into the UK bus market leader and also a global leader for double-deck buses. He's achieved all of this with a relentless focus on the customer, operational excellence, innovative products, and best-in-class aftermarket support. He's won numerous awards such as the IOD Director of the Year, Ernst & Young Awards for Entrepreneurship and Outstanding Achievement. Finally, he's been recognised by Her Majesty the Queen herself with his Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire for services to the bus and coach manufacturing sector. In early 2019, Alexander Dennis was sold to Canadian-based NFI Group for a reported 320 million, and Colin is looking forward to taking up his new role as Vice Chair of the organisation.
Thank you, Benedetto. If only we could finish the interview now. I quite enjoyed that first couple of minutes there. You know, I'm absolutely fine. It's nice in September for the sun to be shining here. So, delighted to chat to you about Alexander Dennis. I could bore for Scotland on buses. So yeah, looking forward to having a chat about it.
Excellent. Tell us, we're going to go a little bit into your career, but what were you doing before you became the CEO of Alexander Dennis back in 2007?
So prior to 2007, I worked for a company called Terex Corporation for approximately 12 years. And I stayed in the States a couple of times, once in the Midwest in Iowa, once in Connecticut. But in that 12 years, clearly being a proud Scot, and it didn't affect my accent too much, but I was part of the team that took the business from roughly $300 million in turnover to almost $9 billion. And in that time, they manufactured, if you like, earth-moving equipment, trucks, aerial work platforms, cranes, things of that order. But what was brilliant for me was in those 12 years, we grew primarily by acquisition, and we made some brilliant acquisitions, some very nicely profitable businesses, but we bought some real basket case Lulus as well. And you learn as much through, troubled brands, troubled customer propositions, troubled financial performance, troubled team dynamics. And I like to think in those 12 years, that helped give me the broader skill set that when I came back to Scotland in 2007 to run Alexander Dennis, I could try and steer us in a positive direction and try and avoid some of the pitfalls and potholes that I had learned, through my my North American ventures.
So take us back to that time. How was Alexander Dennis doing back then?
Well, I agreed to join the business back in 2006, but I didn't get out of Terex until early 2007. Alexander Dennis had been in administration back in 2004. The parent company had effectively become insolvent. And 3 Scottish entrepreneurs invested in it. And a couple of years on, by the time they were talking to me, it was clear that the business had potential. Public transport is an absolutely critical and essential service, but it was kind of turning over 150, 170 million, give or take, and struggling to get much better than break even. And in a business that needs a lot of capital investment for new products, new markets, and innovation, the view was that I'd been there, seen it and done it in a different industry. So, buses and coaches carry people. The business I'd been in before carried dirt, if you like, so we could take some of those transferable skills. And to be honest, in the early days, this is 2007, pre the financial recession, I thought we were going to do a buy and build. So we're going to do an M&A play. And how wrong could I be? Because A, we were private, B, we didn't have the risk appetite that a public company would have, and C, with the financial crisis coming just around the corner, our focus became much more organic. But I guess as well, we had around 20% of the UK market. We were primarily a UK player, but we were seen. And I remember asking one of our key customers, how do you see Alexander Dennis? And he used 2 words, or 3 words actually: white bread, so kind of staple, boring, basic, low-cost product, and dinosaur. You've been around since the late 1800s. You take relationships for granted, and unless you can really raise your game, you guys are going to be extinct. I thought, whoa. I'd written a big check, I'd invested, and I've got a big enough ego that I didn't want to fail, especially back in my homeland. So, we set out to basically get our house in order, and do the basics really well. I've used this saying many times: in the valley of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. If a bus operator is going to provide a reliable bus service, let's design a reliable product. Let's make it fuel efficient. Let's make it value for money in day one, because commercials will always be part of any procurement decision. And that probably took a little bit longer than I would have liked. But that then gave us the springboard to then look at other markets and to leverage other products into other markets.
So was it very much about the product first, or did you look at the overall business and the manufacturing, the finance, etc., all the other parts of it?
I think when I went in, it wasn't quite sink or swim. Because I knew the 3 co-investors, I kind of took everything at 30,000 feet. Public transport, what's not to like? Buses, what's not to like? I went to school in an Alexander bus. This must be a great business. What I found was, basically a team that needed to be re-energized, a team that needed to be broadened in terms of skills and experience. And it's not about bringing everybody in from outside. There was some phenomenal talent inside that just needed, if you like, a bit of building up. So I did recognise that we had some square pegs, round holes, and in the first few months I had to make some tough decisions. It's never easy, when you have to make tough people decisions. We set out some pretty lofty goals. So I said to the team, I want to be £500 million of turnover in 5 years. So 3 times turnover in 5 years. So they all thought I was smoking dope. So we then sort of laid out, how would we get there? What would we need to do in the UK? What would we need to do internationally? What could we go and buy? For example, should we make an acquisition in Australia, high margin market? And we came up with a close enough is good enough strategic plan. We launched our vision and mission statement, which was do the right thing. That was it. I had visions and missions coming out the yin yang in my previous career, but I knew that we shortchanged customers, that people would use gaffer tape or duct tape when they shouldn't. Close enough was good enough. We had service engineers in estate cars. Not all of them had diagnostic computers because they were expensive, so they shared them. It was ridiculous. So there were some real simple basic things that we could do to support the customer. Basically steal with pride. Go and look at what your competitors are doing. What are they doing way better than you that your customers value? How can you be better at those kind of key things than your competitors, albeit further down the line? So we had some lofty financial goals. We got in about the basics. My sales director sadly passed away about a year after I joined the company. But that poor soul should have had knee pads and a flak jacket and a tin helmet, because his job was apologising for a rubbish performance. And we had to turn that on its head, right? If you want to buy cheap, then you're not going to buy from Alexander Dennis. Our value proposition was all about doing the right thing, backing your customer up until their nose bleeds. Actually apologising for some of the sins of the past, writing some cheques for some of the sins of the past where, frankly, we'd been caught with our fingers in the till, right? In terms of not financially doing the right thing, but we actually made good on those things. Because the other thing, very, very quickly, a bus or a coach might be with its original owner for 15 to 20 years. It's a generational business. So if you screw something right up, you might be locked out for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. Buy a car, you maybe keep it 2 or 3 years, or even a van, 3 or 5 years. But people were regaling me of stories in 1990 when I did this, or 1995 when you guys did that. I said I'd never buy another one of your pieces of junk, blah, blah, blah. So the first couple of years was a bit of a baptism of fire. But, a bit of resilience, a bit of confidence, leading from the front, taking one from the team, all those kind of sayings. tone at the top, all that stuff. If you walk the talk, right, and you really just keep, anybody can batter through a brick wall one brick at a time, right? So that's what we kind of did first couple of years.
You mentioned a little bio operational excellence. You're pretty big on just doing the basics well, aren't you?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Everybody can take one step at a time. We don't need to put men or women on the moon, right? And we can talk about entrepreneurial and innovative journeys and whatever. Many, many brilliant businesses are built on meeting customers' requirements excellently, consistently, and we don't need to go there. But from Alexander Dennis's standpoint, we had a bit of kind of smoke and mirrors, black art, call it what you like. We were coach builders. So that means we had some brilliant tradespeople with excellent skills, but every bus then fundamentally was unique. So we then had to look at how do we accelerate that drive towards more process orientation. So, you have a brilliant design, you execute it well, and basically every product is the same. Then when you have to go and support it and maintain it, it's exactly the same. So that's what we started to focus on. And things like, oil leaks, water leaks keep buses off the road. So see, for 40 or 50 pounds in a bill of material, go and find the fixings, the clamps, the connections that don't leak, right? A Jubilee clip might be cheap, but it costs us 200 quid every time one of them fails because there's water or oil leaking onto the pavement. Spend an extra 30, 40, 50 pounds in the right fixings, the right fastenings, and actually with digital cameras, you could take photos of what good looked like, laminate them, have them in the workstation so that there's no excuse not to do it right. We used to corral 6 buses every day, and between 12 and 12:30, me and a handful, a couple of guys from the paint shop, a couple of guys from the assembly line, would go and kick the tyres. I wouldn't necessarily know the technical features of a bus if it ran over my neck, but I knew what good looked like, I knew what a paint run looked like, I knew what a dodgy panel gap looked like, and that's what our customers saw. You go pick up a new car, right? If it had a ding or a scratch or whatever, a bit of damage in the alloy wheel, you wouldn't accept it. A bus is 200 plus £1,000. Why would you, the price of a Ferrari? So on day one, that bus, yes, it may be scratched after a week. Yes, somebody may, graffiti eyes, if that's a word, on the inside or whatever. But on day one, make that experience brilliant. Cover the seats in plastic bags. Have a runner all the way along the central aisle so that once the bus is delivered, you take the bags off and you take that runner away. It smells beautiful, it looks pristine, and you've got a delighted customer. That's not putting men in the moon. That's just doing the basics really well.
And were you super hands-on at this? I take this as the sort of stuff that wasn't delegated.
I walked the factory every day, and in the first 2 to 3 months, I brought in some people from a previous company, people that I had confidence in. I'm from the west of Scotland. I was brought up in Shotts, working class boy, not your stuttering toff. So and used to working with unions, so I was quite comfortable getting out there onto the shop floor. And when I actually saw, for example, someone sitting having their lunch on a bus with their feet up on another set of seats, I went ballistic, and I used, the Queen's vernacular or vocabulary, or call it you like, to great effect. And things like that get around. So walk the talk, in early, stay late, relentless, minimum walk the factory for an hour, different routes, chat to people. Some folks would tell you everything that was wrong with the business. Some people would rather avoid eye contact at all costs because they were either shy or reluctant or whatever. But over time, you get, it's like that, the Good to Great book or whatever, the analogy of the flywheel spinning. You start to get a wee bit of momentum. People were proud to work for Alexander Dennis when they were out of the factory because they would, talk to people in the bar, or if we sent them on international missions, it was great product, great company. We had to try and have everybody proud of the product and the customer experience from the factory. We did up the toilets, we did up the lunchrooms, we painted the damn place, all the basic stuff, just to try and create a wee bit more, not just feel good factor for the team, but when a customer came in, they thought, these boys are not going out of business. This is clean, it's tidy, it's organised. That gives me confidence that the product will be right. So basic stuff, but it had to be done.
See, when you mentioned the vision and the mission and do the right thing, quickly, how did you arrive at that? And then the second part of one is, what did you use to communicate that to the team, or did you have to get rid of a few folk that probably weren't doing the right thing? They were maybe cutting corners.
So yes, we did have to let a few people go, but we treated the folks right, treat them with respect, and whatever else. And sometimes when it's quite a senior guy that gets to go, they get to go with a warm handshake and a few quid. It's actually harder when you're on the shop floor and you get let go and you don't have any runway. Anyway, so I've always believed that if we treat people as I would like to be treated myself, we won't go far wrong. And in terms of the do the right thing, it almost just crept up on everybody, because in the first 3 to 6 months, I was just going ballistic about everything. I've got quite a short temper, I'm quite an emotive guy, but I wanted to do it for all the right reasons. And actually Marks and Spencer's had this saying at that time, do the right thing. So I hoovered that up from them. And we did this strategy away day at Houston House in Broxburn when we were talking about the £500 million and so on. And I said, I'm really scunnered by this, blah, for that and this and the next thing. And this is just, think about it. The bus will last 15 to 20 years. If we piss a customer off, it's a generational thing. We just need to do right by the customer. It was like one of those conversations. We need to do the right thing. And that stuck. And then, 3 years later, we then went with our sort of core vision and values. We get 6 sort of core values. And again, I believed in walking the talk as opposed to winning some literary award or some beautiful artistic award. So that really did start to stick. And we could use so many examples like, service engineers not having the diagnostic capability, everything being an argument, whether was that really warranty, did you break it, did we break it, shades of grey. And, again, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. So do the right thing. They may have broken that or abused this or maybe not read the maintenance manual, but let's get over it, right? The next year or two, we need to become the de facto market leader again, 30+% market share. How do we do that? Well, we do quite well in London. We do quite well with 1 or 2 of the big PLCs. We need to sell to all the big PLCs. We need to be leader in London. And importantly, we need to go after all the quality independents. So from the small family operations with 5 or 10 buses to, say, the loading buses here in Edinburgh with the 800 or 900 that we didn't sell anything to. You only sell to them reputationally. See, when someone tells you that I had a great experience with Alexander Dennis, the bus was delivered on time, it was immaculate, and when I did have a technical issue, they were all over it like the proverbial cheap suit. That's the advertising that you want, because that's what sells more vehicles. And that takes a year, 2, 3 years to get that momentum before you really then start to get the repeat business and stuff like that. And I think, looking back, the big aha for me was a reliable bus service can only be provided by a reliable bus. And a reliable bus can only be designed, procured, manufactured with very consistent processes with the most fit for purpose components that are designed to achieve that particular goal. So it was that walking in the customer's shoes. It wasn't about getting another £1,000 out of the bill of material to make a bit more money, right? Or robbing Peter to pay Paul. It was about, and if you look at our numbers in the first year or two that I was there, our financial performance was rubbish. We made money, but just not very much. So we took the business in the first year, 18 months, from 180, 170 million to nearly 300, right? Oh, how smart. We made £3 million profit, 1% return for all the risk that we took, all the investment that we took. So it was rubbish. But that was foundational, it was fundamental, and that's what really started the transformation.
Just come back to, you mentioned at the beginning you were having earthquakes all over the place because you were going off your head. I'm curious, I'm super curious about this. Like, how important is it? Because there's a couple of different schools of different people do things different ways. So Sir Alex Ferguson was famous for he went, I get out of my system, hairdryer treat. He never used the word hair, but then I kick on from there. I need to get it out of my system. But other folk are a bit more calculating and bottle up and try and be a bit more clever with it and, try and understand the other side of the point. I take it for you getting out your system's quite, just be honest.
Yeah, I think,
the reason I'm asking, I struggle because there's like a cauldron all the time when you want things done in a certain way, right. And I'm always a little bit scared about, I could do the Alex Ferguson at any moment.
I've always been quite driven and quite passionate, and sadly those characteristics can manifest in being a bit of a nutter from time to time. I can't deny that. And I have, shouted and bawled and threatened and followed through in some of those threats and so on with monotonous regularity. I think as I've got older, I've become a bit wiser, a bit calmer. But I like to think it was always for the right reasons. I'm probably a bit more volatile and a bit more in the Ferguson camp. I would also say, I think I recognise that, and I recognise it more as I've got older. And I've never ever had any issue with apologising afterwards, certainly to the individual that maybe took the brunt of it. Maybe partly for good reason, but maybe partly not the way that it could have been delivered. But a bit of tension in a business, a bit of tension from time to time in a relationship, particularly if things aren't going particularly well, I don't think are necessarily a bad thing. Success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. So, and we all want to be part of that winning team. And I think as I've got older, I'm not the sink or swim guy I used to be, because I've left a lot of drowned people behind me, and that's horrible, and there's some regret in that. I think I'm wiser, and I'll throw people life belts and floats way quicker. I think I'm better at that now than I've ever been, and I wish I could have learned how to handle that way better 10, 20 years ago. But every day is a school day.
Yeah, right? Definitely. Interesting. So you've got your house in order, customers are being looked after, your factory's transformed in terms of culture, attitude, the look and feel of the place. What are the next couple of big moves that you make over the few years to obviously to achieve the results that you achieved?
Well, so a couple of things. Very early into when I joined the business, we'd actually started looking at acquiring another bus business in the UK for its coach product line, and potentially for more capacity, and potentially, to be honest, to take on some of the very tough. It was a very unionised environment in Falkirk. We did everything in Falkirk, so it wasn't quite tools down every 2 minutes, but it wasn't, if you like, a marriage, and it wasn't, gives and takes and sort of pluses and minuses. So a combination of buying Plaxton, which was, we bought it within a few months of me joining the business, and that gave us, a slightly bigger stage to play on in terms of product, in terms of customer base, in terms of capacity, but also cost structure, and creating a little bit of internal competition as well. So that, coupled with really looking then at growth markets, and really the growth markets, I didn't want to take on the Germans in Germany. Why would you take on Mercedes or MAN in Germany, or Scania or Volvo in Scandinavia? Because you're going to win second prize, bloody nose, don't be stupid. So our sort of strategic rationale was, where could we take the double deck? It's a bit of a niche product, but same road space as a single deck, carries twice as many people, very efficient product to get the job done. Where are the highest margin markets? So markets like the US, Canada, where the buses are still federally funded, so government 80% funding, so margins were much more attractive. Where could we springboard our relationships in Hong Kong? See if you can put 4,000 buses into Hong Kong with the load factors, the topography, make them commercially attractive. Why couldn't you take them into Singapore, Malaysia, New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on? So kind of lazy man in me saying, well, how do we leverage what we've got first and foremost? So that then sort of got us into built a small team in North America. What do you need in terms of product, in terms of price point, in terms of service and support to sell a couple of hundred buses a year? That's transformational for us in that market. So we laid that out, and within a couple of years, we really get quite excited about it. And we did the same in Asia Pacific. So in Hong Kong, how do we become market leader in Hong Kong first and foremost? And how do we then use that as a springboard initially into Singapore? And then let's look at New Zealand and Australia, because they're high margin markets. And in cities like Melbourne and cities like Sydney, they're so expensive to live and so expensive to park. If you're going to commute, do you want to be standing, hanging on to an articulated bus, or do you want to be sat, right? So you can check your smart device, check your emails. And then today, 10 years on, 4G enabled, bus, coach, it's been brilliant for us, because, as commutes get longer, because people basically can't afford to live downtown, whether it's Edinburgh, whether it's Glasgow, whatever, the commute becomes 30, 40 minutes, and you want to be productive in that time. You'll be way more productive sitting down, maybe even with your smart device charging, whilst doing your emails or playing games or whatever it is that you do. And we also saw oil hitting $120 a barrel, so that was brilliant for us, so we got quite lucky there. So we'd always designed an aluminium, lightweight, double-deck bus. So we then looked at fuel burn per passenger carried or fuel burn per seat. It was way more efficient than any single deck or any articulated bus would be. So we boiled all that into a bit of a pack, if you like, and said, right, well, to get to 500 million in 2012, here's what we got to 480 million in 2012. Now remember, when I set this out in 2007, people thought I was smoking dope, so we failed, right? We only got to whatever 94, 95, 96% of our target. But I wonder if I'd set a target of 250 million, would we have got to 230 or 240? So luck played a part, as it always does. The right bums in the right seats. I think, you know, back to that small steps, we didn't say we're going to be the biggest in North America here, we're going to be this and these big lofty goals. Maybe shaming me, maybe I've not been ambitious enough. But, you know, growing our business almost threefold in the first 5 years, I'll take that. And if that's a failure, I'll take a failure every day of the week.
No, looking back, you think you could have done the figures you'd mentioned, the bigger figures?
Yeah, but through acquisition.
Yeah.
I mean, that was pretty much all, or with one £24 million acquisition that we made, with that exception, everything else was organic. And we took our sort of, you know, EBITDA from around 6-7 million to nearly 40 in 2012.
You really did it weigh on you the fact you only made 97% of your goal?
Well, the fact I've just shared that with you, you know, would tell you that
still winds you up.
And still, you know, close but no banana. You know, but you know, I'll take that. But it's interesting then when you look back, because you sometimes listen to these entrepreneurs and these really successful people telling the story, and they forget to tell you all the lumps and bumps, and they forget to tell you where they were in the right place at the right time, or they could either go left or go right. They went right, and that was absolutely the right direction to take or whatever. And I think you've got to try and always be open, whether I like to admit it or not. Luck does play a part, and having the right team around you is a real blessing, because, you know, without the right team around you, you know, you might be driven, you might be hardworking, you might be all these nice adjectives, but it's a team sport. Yeah. Every business is a team sport.
Did you, just briefly, when you said you had a bit of a presence in Hong Kong, and then you went to places like Singapore and Malaysia and some of the other countries, surrounding countries, did you find culturally that they were similar, so it was a similar process, or did you find they were kind of a bit more different than you would have expected? I think
I've always been quite culturally aware, because I was really fortunate in my sort of previous career, travelled all over the world. I was on the board of 3 Chinese companies, you know, going back to the early 90s. I was going to Inner Mongolia, 1990, 1991, right? You ever want to lose your, you know, forget your Slim Fast plan or any diet plan, go there for a fortnight and you'll drop half a stone. It's way better now, obviously. But I was always a bit, I would like to think, quite culturally aware, maybe not culturally sensitive, but culturally aware. And I think, you know, looking back, we were always tuned in, probably in the first instance, we believe we've got a product solution that's commercially attractive, because without that, it didn't matter how culturally aware you were. And at one extreme, in North America, primarily government funded, English speaking, but still a different selling proposition, very risk averse, right? Because you get, no one was ever fired for buying IBM, so there was never any real, you know, desire to change what you already had, because you're notionally a government employee. So we had to learn that very quickly. And then at the other extreme, you go to Hong Kong or Malaysia, or some of these places, a real heady mix of decision-making, commercials, and also, for example, in Malaysia, very hierarchical, and ultimately, you know, descendants of the royal family are pretty much in every key position. So you had to be kind of down and dirty with getting the product right and the service and support right, but we actually had to bring in, you know, agents and you know, I guess, introductory services to help us try and get in at the right level. And probably the final point I would make in the very early days was, when we were invited to tender, we were 3 years too late. You've got to build a relationship before the tender comes out, because people buy from people. You know, humans are social creatures, and it's about the relationship, it's about having the confidence and the trust in your supplier partner that they're going to do the right thing, as I talked about earlier, that doing the right thing.
Yeah, definitely. And so that was obviously, that takes into account the moving to different markets and that. And what would be any other things that you think's worth sharing that got you over to to achieve the 400? Was it 392? No,
480.
Sorry, 480.
Nearly 500.
What other things would you say made the biggest difference?
Well, again, luck played a bit of a part as well, because with the London Olympics, and Boris Johnson wanted lots of new double decks, and Boris Johnson had committed to get rid of all the articulated buses. So, I'll never ever lose sight of the fact that probably 50 to 100 million of that was glossy and lucky. But then I would equally say for our team, none of us could have predicted a global financial crisis kicking in late 2008 and all the way into early 2010. And we could have used that as an excuse. But we come up with these plans pre the crisis, pre-COVID, pre-whatever, and COVID screwed it over and blah, 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 right? Yeah. Well, get over it, right? Life is not a bowl of cherries or whatever that saying is. You get good and bad. You need to take full advantage of the good, mitigate the bad, and nobody wants you to get your violin out. I think on a one-to-one basis, when you're either working with people, mentoring people, whatever, I think when you can bring those stories to life, people get it, and they can relate to the kind of key facts or whatever in their world or their business or their competitive landscape or whatever. And I think as Scotland PLC, as a small country, there should be no excuse for us not being able to share our learnings, goods and bads. And again, I'll be honest with you, I've probably learned more through the bad stuff and the mistakes. I worked for a couple of brilliant people, and I've worked for a couple of real howlers. And I learned way more from the howlers in terms of what not to do.
What made the howlers howlers?
The one biggest howler, in fact, the two of them were utter nutcases. So one of them was talking earlier about, my temper and controlling and whatever. One of them was just a schizophrenic off the scale, and you could never do anything right. And he was a Bulgarian national who'd moved to the States, and the way he treated people was absolutely abhorrent. It was just, and I learned, I was still a bit of a nutter, but if I hadn't worked for him, I'd probably be even more of a nutter. And the other guy was so anal in attention to detail and projects, and he'd come from a great big defence corporate. What he tried to do was just apply almost like, the what do you call the guy, Ford model of, you can have any colour as long as it's black. So for him, it was, to the man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Everything was just to his toolkit. And we probably lost years and millions, if not billions, of shareholder value because this guy just would not listen and would not take the value from the team dynamic and the bigger picture.
I was going to ask, obviously, I think halfway through your time, there was a big move towards low emissions, and can I ask, was that values driven on Alexander's part, or was that sort of market customer driven that was becoming more important to them?
So clearly the political answer would be to say, it was very much driven by, no, it was market driven, make no mistake about that. But in saying that, whether it's emissions going from Euro 4 to Euro 5 to Euro 6, to hybrid products, to compressed natural gas, and now full zero emission electric buses, and all the way even to hydrogen in the future and so on, we've always been at the cutting edge of having the very best in class partners, making sure that the product is thoroughly designed and fit for purpose for its duty cycle. Bus is very different from, say, a lorry. Right, a lorry does 50, 60, 70,000 miles a year, top gear, motorways, very little stop-start. A bus is never in its same state more than a few hundred yards, right? So what we have tried to do is not just be, first or second to market with brilliant technologies, but the most fit for purpose technology in that duty cycle, right? Now, we've been building buses with our, electric zero emissions drivetrain since 2016, right? How many electric trucks are running around the UK? Right, and these buses have been on frontline service in London initially for over 4 years now, for over 300,000 miles per bus. So I'm very, very proud of the fact that it wasn't just about very quickly stick a battery in it and get it out there, but it was about spending lots of time, lots of money with the best in class supply chain, techie partners, and then going to Millbrook, which is a vehicle test facility down towards Luton. And then just breaking them, so that when we then go to market, you can be confident that our business is best designed, thoroughly tested, and will most certainly be best supported, not just in the warranty period, but for that 10, 12, 15-year product life cycle with you, Mr. Customer.
Fantastic. And you've set up a few different things, Alexander. Dennis, the one that was most interesting is the Emerging Leadership Academy. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about how you identify leaders, and then once you've identified them, how you help them to develop those qualities.
Okay. So just before we go on, maybe I could just talk very quickly about AD24, which is our sort of techie portal. So product is one thing, but getting the right parts to the right customer and actually having video tutorials so that you can see how to, I don't know, change a foo-foo valve, change a filter, change a brake disc, whatever. So we've spent a huge amount of money on having this AD24 portal available 24/7. So it serves to make sure that our vehicles are maintained to the highest standard, and it's pretty much like Amazon in terms of one-click ordering. So we haven't just worked on getting the product reliable, but we've tried to envelope it within everything that our customers need. So I just think that's a point worth getting in, and no one else is doing that right now. That's the other beauty of being a relatively small private company. And this all predates NFI's acquisition. You can run like crazy with stuff like that as opposed to taking forever to get 14 legal signatures on a template. So coming back to leadership then and what we've done. So back in 2007, when I joined the company, we didn't hire apprentices. And I thought that was really sad, because a company that had been around for over 100 years with a huge engineering pedigree didn't hire apprentices. And it didn't hire apprentices because it saw that as a cost. Our average age at that time was 48. I'm no ageist, but that's getting up there. And in the very early days, immediately, pretty much, we hired around 30 apprentices, and we've done that ever since across all of our facilities. It took us 2 years to really then start to create our graduate development program, because frankly, I didn't want graduates or interns coming in to learn how to make tea, coffee, and to photocopy and to shred documents, because historically, sadly, some kids don't get the opportunity to have really interesting projects with brilliant mentors and ideally taking something forward. So AD24, our internet portal, guess what? We have Entrepreneurial Scotland interns in every year. These really bright kids come in, right? We dovetail them with some of our best and most experienced, brilliant people, and they do great things. Because the youngsters challenge us to look at our world differently. The internal experts, if you like, give the bright young things the backdrop as to why some of these things could or couldn't be done, or why it would be difficult and so on. And a combination of both things break through walls. So by 29-10, we had a nice youth component coming through this old factory with old people. By 2010, we'd then be talking to Scottish Enterprise, and frankly, I wanted to promote from within. Every time you bring someone in from outside, now I'd come in from outside and I brought some people in from outside, but I'll tell you what, if you can promote from within. So Wally McGlumfer was a brilliant tradesman, and then he became a brilliant supervisor. He's never had a day's training. So whether it's leadership, communications, toolbox talks, just some of the basics around giving Willie the tools, the confidence, the network to be the best Willie that Willie ever wants to be. And let's not forget, some people want a job, some people want a career. Those that want a job, I want to work hard to make sure that they have a job, they have an income, and they're confident in their future. Those that want to have a career, I want to help them with their toolkits. Some people do want to travel, are prepared to compromise the work-life balance a little bit to turbocharge the career ladder. Some people need more technical skills or interpersonal skills. So apprentices, we started to to basically facilitate them getting onto Strathclyde Uni and doing degrees and all this electronic stuff I'll never understand in a million years. Some of our really strong leaders, we partnered with Edinburgh University in one particular program, partnered primarily with Strathclyde as well. So you want to have a career, you can have a career. And then we would put somewhere between 10 and 20 emerging leaders through a series of programs over 2 to 3 years. So for the last, and all of that, for the most part, has been funded by we were spending over £1 million a year in headhunters. We now spend 200 or 300 grand a year on it, right? So we still need to go outside, and sometimes when you really need a particular skill set, you need to go outside. And ideally, if we're 10 years behind Ford Motor Company on a particular product attribute, go and hire someone from Ford Motor Company and accelerate your learning. Maybe that's a silly example. So there's still a need to bring in skills and experience from outside. But if you can promote from inside, the feel-good factor and the recognition those individuals get for having been brilliant and loyal servants, why would you not invest in them, right? So that's kind of where we...
And do you get them to, you obviously give them a project and they lead on that project and you see how they go on?
We haven't always got it right, so we've worked on some group projects. We always have cohorts from across the business, so from across different disciplines and across different sites. So they build their network. So if someone in Scarborough, because I mean all our sites are really glamorous, we don't have anywhere like Monaco or Saint-Tropez, where Scarborough and Sheffield and places, Skelmersdale and places like that. But they get to build their own network across our little world, and they get to go from being functionally expert to understanding how a business works, how that clumsy handoffs from finance to operations to engineering can create downstream carnage, where in fact, if they get to walk in their peers' shoes and understand their needs and wants to do their job to a brilliant standard, it can be quite reciprocal, and then just keeps raising the bar all the time. So it's far from brilliant, right? But it's good. And it didn't exist not that long ago.
I know, that's amazing. I think it's a lovely thing to see that sort of momentum in a business where you see people coming up, you know, as I heard, it's a nice wee cheesy quote, you're never too old to learn and you're never too young to teach. That was a good one, which I thought was quite nice. I'm now just going to move on quickly to COVID. So you're still the chief exec, just...
Yes. Hanging on.
Tell us, what was your sort of mindset when you started to realise the severity of it, and then what did you do after that?
Well, I mean, COVID, as you're maybe never too old to learn, but holy moly, have we had to do some learning in this last 6 months. So, you know, watched the news January, February, and kind of thought, well, it'll never happen to us, I think, as most people did. Come March time, as we then started to flirt with lockdown, it became very, very clear at that point we might need to shut down for a couple of weeks and maybe 3 weeks, and how might that impact customers? And then clearly it just became turbocharged on the downside. And in the very early days, you know, avoid unnecessary journeys, work from home if you can. It's your civic duty not to use public transport. So all of our customers overnight saw revenue decline of anywhere up to 80%. So they faced their own existential crisis. What do? They defer orders, they cancel orders, and overnight we went from a trajectory of £750 million of turnover and record profit to will we survive? I mean, that was really scary. As a chief executive, normally, if market X is up and market Y is down, or product X up and product Y is down, you've got a most likely outcome that you will hit your targets, you will hit your numbers, give or take. So we then pretty much went from overnight. Thankfully, the furlough scheme was implemented, so that allowed us for people to stay at home and at least get, you know, for the most part, get a big chunk of their wages. But we then thought, holy moly, our customers are knackered. How are we going to resolve this? So we started to engage with government, so Department for Transport, Baroness Veer, Grant Shapps, the Transport Minister, Andrew Gilligan, the Prime Minister's advisor on transport and so on, to say, guys, public transport, existential service, you know, every town and every city, public transport is a spinal cord. Kids don't have an alternative, old people don't have an alternative, and many people in between don't have an alternative. You want to address congestion, you want to address air quality, we can do that, we can fix that. We've invested in all these best-in-class zero emissions and products. Come on, because our customers aren't going to order any buses because, frankly, they don't know if they're going to exist. They're getting a little bit of government support, but not enough to invest. 6 months on, we've taken advantage of the furlough, which ends at the end of next month. North America's dodged away on a slower burn, but it's government funded. Asia Pacific's dodged away because China, Hong Kong, Singapore, they grabbed it quickly. So, you know, there's been some delays there, but there's not been a reduction in demand. The UK has been cataclysmic. So, and frankly, the concern that we have is unless government fund, and Boris Johnson announced a £5 billion investment in green, transportation. We expected at least half of that, towards green buses, the rest towards sort of cycling and walking and so on. But time's our enemy now, right? We've eked out the meagre order book that we have, but unless something gives in the coming weeks, we're going to be in a horrible place. So I should have finished up in May. I agreed to stay until September. We have a brilliant guy running the business who was promoted from within and a beneficiary of some of the great programs that we put in place. So he's walking and talking, the business. But his name's Paul Davis. He's got a really, really tough job because there's never a week gone by that I haven't wrote to everybody, our key suppliers, all of our employees. Paul's continued to do that. We know that extended furlough, mental health, connectivity, social beings, keeping up with your workmates, we know it's been incredibly, incredibly difficult, for lots of people. The first week or two was like an extended holiday. I'll get the grass cut, I'll emulsion the living room ceiling or whatever. But since then it's just got tougher and tougher and tougher. I am now a convert to Zoom and to Teams and so on. And there have been some fantastic technologies that we've been able to use that are better than nothing. But complex situations and human beings being social creatures, there's still no substitute for, and certainly with customers and those maybe that you have a slightly more distant relationship, COVID has certainly tested some of those relationships a bit more. So, public transport is not, actually in some ways, not dislike the airline industry, which has been absolutely savaged. Yeah. But the airline industry, at least, is mostly discretionary journeys. You can choose not to take a holiday or you can choose not to take a business trip. But public transport must survive. It must, because it's maybe not quite as important as education or social work or whatever, but it provides a really, really essential service to millions of people every day.
You mentioned that your order books, so is getting more and more reduced. How do you resolve that? You mentioned government. You mentioned a few other things like.
Well, the reality is you can only play the hand that you're dealt. Yeah. So the things that you control. So for example, the furlough scheme has been hugely beneficial. So you go talk to your customers and say, can you please take your buses as late as possible so that we can maximise the furlough for as long as possible and keep key people in employment for as long as possible. Yeah. Most customers will work with you on that. Yeah. You can go and look at the income streams that are less impacted, like North America, like our aftermarket parts business, like our Asia business, and go and wring out the dishcloth and make sure you're all over everything there and try and find a bit of an offset to the UK. Beyond that, then it's really down to either public transport getting back to 90 or 100%, operating companies making money and investing in capital equipment, or government bridging the gap. And the UK is made up of really 3 bus manufacturers, and we're all brilliant at double decks. If those businesses of that industry cease to exist, there's no plan B. There's no European manufacturer, and the volumes are so low, right? And the product is so bespoke that none of the big Europeans will get excited about it. So double decks are a key fabric of public transport in the UK, as are minibuses, for feeder routes and stuff like that. So there needs to be a way through this. So I think the team at ADL, and with the competition as well, have done everything in their power to control the things that they have some influence over to 3 decimal places. Yeah. I really do. But as we talked about luck earlier, sometimes luck plays a part on the plus side. And certainly with COVID, certainly on the negative side. I wish I'd been in Amazon or Ocado or Netflix or Facebook or Zoom or some other businesses where either working from home or dining at home or logistics. But some businesses have been whacked way harder than others. Yeah. Airline industry one, certainly our business, public transport. I've spoken more about buses and coaches, but look at tourism. No one's come to the UK this year. So coaches have hardly turned a wheel. So at least if you have a bus business, the government is still funding you to provide essential journeys. You'll still see buses running everywhere. But coach operators have had it even harder. So tough old world. But That you play the hand that you're dealt. We're all born into different circumstances, different parents, different values. You play the hand that you're dealt. Get over it.
I've got some questions about the future, but I'll get to them at the very, very end. As you mentioned, we've got a few Q&A. We had lots and lots of people with questions for you, Colin. Everybody wanted to ask you something. The first one is from a young gentleman. Blake Cotter was a senior designer at National Express. As I mentioned earlier, I went to university with Blake, and while we were all crazy about cars, Blake is a proper aficionado about buses, including being an owner of not just one, but a few. Anyway, he asked me to ask you, is there a market for rapid transit double-deckers as an alternative to the current single-deck articulated solution?
I think the answer to that is yes. It's a brilliant question. We've just sold 29 new all-electric buses, double decks, into National Express, so thank you, Blake, for your custom. I think, there is no one size ever going to fit all. So, for example, as we know, the UK is made up of roads that were designed by the Romans 2,000 years ago, and therefore articulated buses at 18 plus metres long, up to 24 metres long, just won't work. So you need to find the right solution. If it's very quick, alighting times, boarding off, and jumping back off buses, Arctics make sense, but the road network needs to be more gridded or whatever. So, long answer to a short question. We have, for example, put over 200 buses, double decks, into the city of Toronto. We've put over 200 into the city of Ottawa. Both of those cities typically used articulated buses, but guess what? Articulated buses jackknife in the winter. Double decks can run when articulates can't. People are commuting longer and longer. Double deck buses have more seats than articulated buses. So it's a much, much better passenger experience. But if you're only on a bus for 2 minutes, 3 minutes or whatever, single deck can still be more fit for purpose. But my argument would be, there's lots of congestion, lots of air quality, lots of problems that still need to be solved in the world's public transport infrastructure, and double deck definitely has a much bigger part to play.
Excellent. I also asked, is there a role for 3D printing for future bus building, perhaps where certain operators could have their own ADL design?
Well, I think 3D printing is probably the biggest breakthrough in the last 20 years. And I think the simple answer at 30,000 feet is yes. So for example, if you want the front of the bus to be bespoke and unique to you, then 3D printing can definitely enable that, because historically, if you went with GRP, the cost of tooling, cost of molds and so on could run into tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds, and therefore you always want to have a consistent design. 3D design certainly allows more bespoke design, but with it comes more cost, more complexity. And if you have your own design, then what happens when one gets crashed or broken or somebody damages it? It becomes a lot harder then to supply those parts to make sure the vehicle's kept on the road. So, I've read recently about Rolls-Royce motor cars having potentially bespoke commissions, and every car could be different from 2035 onwards. So can buses, but the model needs to work. So it's not just about how it looks on day one, but beyond that, then how you service and support the product. But we're right up for 3D printing and the innovation it provides to our industry.
Excellent. I've got a great question here from Shona Howitt, who's a curriculum manager of essential skills at Ayrshire College. And she had a great question, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, is how do we break down perceived barriers in our young people and help them believe that their dreams or aspirations can be a reality? Well,
I think that's a brilliant question from Shona. And, one very, very quick, simple example. So I come from the west of Scotland. My dad worked in a factory, my mother worked in a bakery, brought up in a council house and so on. I was quite aspirational. I wanted to have a nice car, wanted to have a detached house that wasn't a council house and so on. Anyway, and 35 years on, I've been able to tick all of those boxes. I ask many people, when was the last time you went to a school or a college and talked about your journey, goods, bads and uglies? I personally recently went to Larbert High School and talked to lots of very, very bright young 5th and 6th years about my personal journey. And interestingly, lots of really good questions, but also interestingly, many of those kids had gone and taken on loans to buy Minis and Fiat 500s, and as a consequence of that, they had to work in the evening as opposed to study. So I think when you can actually feed back your journey, that helps to resonate with lots of bright young kids. And if you can help one or two or three on a slightly different path, then you've done a brilliant thing. And don't get me started on the sort of broader social issue. I still think it's really difficult to learn if you're hungry. So how many primary school kids, for example, still go to school and they're hungry and they will never achieve that potential because, their primary need is food as opposed to actually education from their teacher. So I think lots of us, not just in industry or business, but lots of us can give back to a much, much broader church, if you like, than we do right now, if we consider it even a number 2 or a number 3 priority.
Shauna's doing I know Shauna pretty well, and she's doing a lot of work in this area. I wouldn't be surprised if she has you down at Ayrshire College. Takes you up on your suggestion there. I'm going to just quickly, I think you've kind of touched on this a little bit. How do we encourage entrepreneurship in our young people? That was our second question.
Depends how you define entrepreneurship. So we've all read about Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson and Mark Zuckerberg and so on. For me, everybody has the potential to do great things. There's that great, saying, you'll never work a day in your life if you love what you do, right? So in some ways, if you actually focus on things that you really enjoy and you surround yourself with people that you can spark off, then you can absolutely do great things. I don't consider myself as a classic entrepreneur, but I'm intelligent. Everybody has, a good degree of intelligence. I like to think I'm quite innovative. I like to think I'm quite creative. I like to think I'm never satisfied with the status quo. I like to think I'm hardworking, and I have a drive and a desire historically for material things. As you get a little bit older, your drives and your desires change a little bit. I think every one of us has that raw moulding clay in slightly different mixtures, and it's how we bring what good looks like for those individuals, and we help mentor and educate and share experiences with them to do brilliant things. So, 1 in a billion will make a gazillion billion pounds, but lots of people can actually do great things and have a brilliant life and a brilliant lifestyle just by really focusing on what they're special and unique at.
Create a new kind of current or a new term of currency, gazillion, bazillion. Well, we're running out of things about billions to trillions, and now I don't. What's the gazillions? Stuart Nielsen is a global Scot working in Bahrain and works voluntarily for the Scottish Government, promoting inward investment to Scotland as well as exports. Got a couple of questions. What factors do you take into account when you were developing your international strategy? You've kind of touched on that. And what worked and what? I'm more interested in what didn't work.
Well, again, we in terms of our international strategy, it was picking fights that we could win. Yeah. Right. So without getting into all the previous, looking at various markets, looking at the quality of the competitors, looking at the quality of the commercials, and just doing 2 or 3 because that's all we had the bandwidth to do. Right.
You don't like fair fights.
Well, but no, I don't. I suppose, but there's a big wide world out there, and. Yeah. You could all dine out and all. We took on, and interestingly, last year we won a huge deal in Germany for the city of Berlin, right? So ultimately, even that fight makes sense, but it didn't make sense 10 years ago. Yeah. And sometimes recognize, where did we get things wrong? We've always been driven. And that whole sort of under-promise, over-deliver. Sometimes you under-promise and under-deliver. So I think you need to sort of reflect on yourselves and make sure that you don't take on too much. In some markets and some products that we got into, we should have avoided. We said yes too easily. That would probably be the biggest pitfall. So we did some of these virtual electric, almost like your tooth, how an electric toothbrush charges, right? So we developed buses like that, right? Cost us a couple of £1 million. We sold 5 of them. Stupidity. Right, we developed a product with Mercedes, small coach, small volume, didn't do our market research properly, stupidity. So, we've had 2 or 3 brilliant breakthroughs, but with 2 or 3 real howlers as well. Yeah. But sadly, I don't know any business that will get everything right all the time. No. So, pick yourself up, dust yourself down, get on with it.
Fantastic. And there's another question he has, but this is also same question. Richard Muir, the Deputy CEO of the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. What advice would you give Scottish manufacturers looking to expand overseas today?
Today, in COVID world, I would say, first and foremost, don't bet the farm. Take a half step back and make sure right now that the core engine is firing on 4 or 5 or 6 of 6 cylinders, and pick your battles very, very wisely. I believe you're going into new international markets, particularly those that require a significant amount of investment. Then you need to be confident you're going to be successful, and you do more good than harm. And right now, in the coming 3, 6, 9, 12 months, we're going from annual budgets and aspirations to, I believe, a shorter term horizon, maybe looking at the next 3, 6 months on a rolling horizon, and just know when to take that bet or whatever. I think things are going to be a little bit tougher for a little bit longer, and I've seen too many folks go and try and do wonderful things from an export standpoint. The core business has gone spectacularly upside down, and then you end up with a real mess on your hands. So every business is unique. I guess the other thing I would say is, don't be alone. Go and talk to other folks that have done it, and whether it's your pals or your peers at Alexander Dennis or Weir Group or Wood Group or AG Bar, or even some of the smaller companies that have gone international. Go talk to Entrepreneurial Scotland or Entrepreneurial Exchange.
Or Richard, the guy from the Chamber of Commerce. You want me to get a wee plug in?
but Chamber of Commerce, join the Institute of Directors. There are lots of brilliant organisations out there that if they can't answer your question, they'll always know someone that can. And I think just getting that perspective is a brilliant thing, because only you can make that call. But I'll tell you what, having the most points of light to help you make that call, why not? It's a lonely old place being the gaffer or being the head of a particular function, but steal with pride. Go and learn, before you make that big decision.
Excellent. We've got Ati Rexu, who's the founder and CEO of Sigma, which is an Edinburgh startup, and she had 3 questions, kind of on your style as a leader, if you like. So I'll put all three of these out at once. What does a good day of productivity look like? Between sales and investment, which ones do you prioritise as CEO? And besides family, what keeps you going through the tough times?
How do you define that? I mean, when you're frazzled and it's 6 o'clock at night and you haven't had time to go to the toilet, is that a really productive day or not? Probably not. I think you always have to reflect on where you're really adding value. Everybody can be really busy every day. But, as chief executive, you're responsible for the medium to longer term. You're responsible for the delivery of that strategic plan, not the annual operating plan, or not this day's sales or this month's sales or whatever. So always reflect on what you're paid to do and what the team needs you to do. And don't just be busy because that made you productive, right? So I don't know if that quite answers the question, but I think you should always reflect on that. And in terms of, the second point around investment versus sales, they kind of go hand in hand. I think because we historically ran a private company, we were quite picky on our investments, because if we got them wrong, we were dead, right? So I think, try and stack the odds in your favour. So if you're going to invest, look at your upside case, look at your downside risk. How can you mitigate that downside risk? And if you can be very confident mitigating that downside risk, go for it, right? Because the upside potential will take care of itself. However, if that downside risk is so significant because either sales volume's low or the competitive challenges are a bit too tough, maybe you still do it, but maybe just not now, right? Because I always believe there are some really, really clear priorities that you can actually go and crack on with, and don't go bet the farm, don't go in the roulette wheel and have everything in black or red, because you will fail, right? 1 in a billion will get it right, but the other 999 million of us won't. So you just take that on board. That's life.
In tough times?
Was that around work-life balance? And
just if you've had, I presume, a series of things not go your way over a sort of period of time.
I think we're all, nobody is infallible. And some folks, they've got more front than Blackpool front, right? And they will never, ever, ever tell you about, the really, really dark days. But yeah, you know yourself. So for example, when you've let yourself down, no one else is going to give you a harder slap than you've given yourself. And I've been through, so if I take COVID times, in the last 6 months, we've built a brilliant business that's had to be significantly unpicked. 650 people having to leave their business. Horrible. I can still look myself in the mirror and know that I've tried to do the right thing to protect the team that's going to be there. Sometimes, when you're pruning a plant or whatever, you need to cut away a few leaves and whatever else. Sometimes you need to cut into the bone whether you like it or not. And that's just horrible. I think the human side of many business decisions is a thing that probably would drag you down. But people look to you, not always to be cheeky chappy and happy Charlie, but they look to you to be strong and to be resilient. And my advice always to folks is, it is a lonely old job. I've been very, very fortunate in my last 20 years. I've built some brilliant relationships with people that I work for that I do consider friends. I built brilliant relationships with co-investors. I built brilliant relationships. I was in the YPO for a good number of years. I'm now chair of Entrepreneurial Scotland Foundation. I'll get people to talk to. And I would encourage you, go find your own people to talk to. When you're having dark times, whether it's personal, whether it's business, someone's been there before, or you will get a perspective that might just take you to another place. And that's been probably my biggest learning in the last 12, 13 years since I became CEO. Because when I was, a functional president and I was an operations director, whatever, I had a broader church to speak to. But I think the further up that pyramid you go, you're sitting on a big sharp pointy thing. So, look at sort of almost inverting that pyramid if you can, and build your own network to support you.
Nice. That's really effective but really simple advice, which is brilliant.
I'm good at simple.
Last question for now. Peter James Dixon, Senior Investment Manager at OC Oerlikon in Zurich. Why did you sell?
Why did we sell?
Yeah.
Well, 12, 13 years, well, I guess it was 12 years on as CEO, we'd built a business that had grown from effectively, broadly, a break-even business, turning over 150 million, selling into the UK and a little bit of export. 12 years on, we built a brilliant international business. We became market leader with over 50, 60% of the market. We became nicely profitable, 2,500 team members, and we'd really invested in many of those folks that particularly wanted to have a career as opposed to a job. And NFI Group, the company that we sold to, they wanted to buy us. So they were the world's largest truly independent bus and coach manufacturer, based in Canada, but market leader in both the US and Canada. The next 5 to 10 years, product investment is going to only get higher. Investment in hydrogen and next generation zero emissions vehicles and so on. So they were doing all of that investment, so were we. Why wouldn't you leverage that investment, those learnings? ADL's most profitable market is North America. Double Deck has grown exponentially in North America. They've got the facilities, the people, the route to market, the relationships with key transport agencies that we would take another 10 or 20 years. So lots of things, very strong price, very strong parent, very strong partner that we were confident would take ADL to the next level. So it wasn't your private equity, fill it full of debt, wham bam thing. None of that nonsense. It made sense at the people level, at the product level, at the market level, and at the financial level.
Alan, do you have a question? Do you want to ask?
So my question was when you mentioned people that they have sometimes they want a job, sometimes they want a career. How do you read the people? How do you know when they are there for a long time with you and you can trust them and you can invest in them, and some how do you?
Well, I don't think you can ever get all of that right. So those people that want to have a career would typically not be shy. So they would have a view and opinion on things. They would have energy. They would be bright. They would be problem solving in their own space. So, and even if they're not minded to come to you and look to develop their career, you would be minded to go to them and say, I like everything that I see in you, and I think you can play on a bigger stage. I think you can do great things, and I think to broaden that journey and to broaden the need for the company. I want to have you in this leadership development program or this technical development program or whatever. So I think it kind of works both ways. When you have a career, that sometimes that can mean trade-offs. It can mean the work-life balance being a little bit upside down because you have to invest more time, whether it's travel, whether it's education, and whether it's just when you take responsibility when things don't go right. Typically, your days become longer and longer and longer. And I think sometimes we probably miss a few people because there's maybe someone who would have been the most brilliant and outstanding leader, but they've chosen to keep their head down. But they might be a town councillor, they might coach a local football team, they might be a brilliant leader outside of work and choose to have a job because they get their fulfillment externally. And that's brilliant too. So we've tried, and sometimes you have to coax people because they don't want to put their head above the parapet because they feel if they let themselves down or they fail in inverted commas, then why did I even bother? So it's quite difficult to sort of find that way through. But what we've found over time is the early adopters have been brilliant proponents for the later adopters. And as I say, I also believe still that you need to get that blend. There's huge. We've got 2,500 people, so you're not going to tell me that there's not 1, 2, 3, 4% of our 2,500 people that are capable of doing even more brilliant things. That's 100 people, right? The trick is trying to see what we think the business is going to need in 1, 2, 3 years. And it's not just about the retirement curve and who's leaving and how you backfill them. But I talked about AD24, our internet portal, to try and make business easier for our customers. We still don't know what we're going to need 5 years beyond that. But I'll tell you what, I'm not quite ready to hire someone from Amazon, but there's really, really smart people from really, really progressive industries out there that will fulfill a need for us at some point in the future as well. And it's just getting that balance right.
Do you think the more you understand what the business needs, the easier the hire becomes? Because the more specific you are in scoping out what it is you're looking for, and it just makes it more...
Yes and no. I think the problem I've always had with hiring or headhunting or whatever is I would say my success rate is 1 in 3. 1 in 3, you get a brilliant fit. So the cultural fit, the skills, the experience that the individual brings is just phenomenal, and we call them multipliers because they then spread that across their peers and the whole business gets a multiplication effect. 1 in 3 is kind of okay. So good hire, good quality hire, but samey. They fit in, they do a good job, they bring some skills and experience. And then 1 in 3, they talk themselves into a brilliant job, but the fit's not right, or the skill's not right, or whatever. And it may be our fault, it may be their fault, it may be a combination of both. And they're real detractors of value because you've hired them, you've got a sense of responsibility. So in the first month or two that it wasn't the right hire, but you endeavour to make it work. Yeah. And 6 and 12 and 24 months can go by. Yeah. And not only did you not make progress, you went spectacularly backwards. Yeah. And then the best thing to do for both parties is a warm handshake, treat the person properly and respectfully, and get on with the rest of your lives. And that's one of the reasons I'm more pro-promoting from within, spending hundreds of thousands of pounds in building brilliant talent, because you can't fake sincerity all the time. Yeah. So you really know that individual internally because they've been with you, they've given their best for the last 10, 15, 5, whatever number of years it is. So you know what you've got from day one, as opposed to, I've hired brilliant people, but they were just, and actually I think when you're hiring someone from outside as well, you've got the responsibility. They typically are leaving a brilliant job. So you actually owe it to them to do a brilliant job for them. Because sometimes it's not fair if you get it wrong. So someone can have had a brilliant fit in, I don't know, Ernst & Young's finance department, but they come in and be an accountant in our business, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Final question, what's the future hold? I think you've touched on what Alexander Dennis is in his future within NFI, but what about your own future? What's the future hold for Colin Robertson?
I'm 55 years old now. I've been working for 38 years, started as an apprentice, and I've loved my career. I mean, someone once said to me, I hope you live a long time, but if someone read your eulogy at your funeral, what would they say? And they would probably say he loved his work, he loved his cars, and he quite liked his family. Now I hope they would maybe expand on that a wee bit. But what's next for me? Well, having relocated back to Scotland, I love Scotland. I'm a proud Scot. I've been very lucky. I've had some brilliant career learnings that I believe I should be doing more to share, and whether that's with the youngsters at the start of their career or whatever, or whether it's helping other businesses, other leaders in some shape or form. So I'm certainly going to be devoting a bit of my time to that. Never say never around running another business, another turnaround, because I'm still quite inquisitive. I've still got a good energy level. But the next few months, I want to take a bit of stock on that. I have my own investment company, Robertson Campbell Limited, which is looking to invest in businesses where basically I like the leadership, I like the CEO or managing director. It's maybe 30, 40 million, looking to get to 70 or 100, so a little bit smaller than I've done historically. It's maybe looking for a little bit of financial investment. I'm in a fortunate position that I want to be not just an investor in time, but back businesses and back individuals that I think can do brilliant things. So who knows where we end up there. The next 3, 6, 9 months, who knows? I will keep myself busy. I will keep myself out the pub. I will keep myself from being under my wife's feet. So I've given her that commitment. I've got a brilliant network. So watch this space.
Excellent. Colin, thank you very much.
Welcome.
I feel we should do a wee round of applause at the end of that.
I told you I could talk for Scotland.